1 Chronicles 22. Let's call this one Why and subtitle it So That You May Succeed, which comes directly out of verse 11 in this chapter, where David, as we mentioned, is now going to make preparations for building the temple at the site where he built the altar to stop the plague on the floor, the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And so, having built an altar that stopped the plague, he is going to use that as ground zero for basically erasing the horrible memory of the census and building something that'll actually be the cause of honor in years going forward for Israel as opposed to shame. So we're going to see the way that David makes preparation for building the temple, and he's going to also explain to Solomon how he wanted to build it himself, but God, as we mentioned, put the brakes on that. And so David is not going to waste time by simply twiddling his thumbs as he drifts off into the sunset, preparing to hand things off to Solomon. He is going to make sure that Solomon is surrounded by the right people to help him get the temple built. And that's something that we are going to see at both the beginning and the end of the chapter. But in between, we're going to see that David also makes sure that Solomon has an abundance of great materials to use for building the temple. And beyond that, he's going to make sure that the people and the materials are all gathered together to work in a healthy environment, understanding that David is going to let Solomon know, that God let him know, that Solomon would be a man of rest. And this chapter is going to help us make a distinction between rest and leisure. And even though this might simply be a distinction that I am drawing between the two terms, rest is one of those things that can help us prepare to be more effective at work, whereas leisure might just simply be relaxing for the sake of relaxing. And so here David is telling Solomon, a man of rest, to arise and work. Why? Because he's going to run kind of an old-fashioned guilt trip on him by the time we get to chapter 22, verse 14, where he is going to say, with great pains I have provided for the house of the Lord. That reminded me of there are times when our parents can pull us aside when they see us going astray and help us understand how the things that we do have a context, and they often take place in the context of people who have provided a home for us or things for us at great pains. So that's what David is doing here. But it's not just an idle guilt trip. Why? Because Solomon has an important purpose in the future of Israel as a nation. As it's sometimes said, heavy is the head that wears the crown. And so there are a lot of privileges that go along with it. But likewise, a lot of people are depending upon him for their livelihoods. And so in this chapter, David is going to remind him that his privilege has come at the sacrifice specifically of David, but not just David, all the people who are ready and waiting to help him get the temple built. And beyond that, this chapter, because Solomon was recognized for being a wise young man, he reminded me of other wise young men who I know who don't necessarily have the kind of environment that would allow them to make the most of their abilities. And so part of Solomon appreciating his position is succeeding because not everyone has the same opportunity to make the most of their talents. And it seems that even if Solomon doesn't understand that or care about that in the specific, he understood or appreciated something similar when God made the offer for Solomon to simply ask for what he wanted. And Solomon just asked for the wisdom to know right from wrong so that he could lead the nation effectively. And God said, because you have asked for this thing, not necessarily riches for yourself or vengeance against your enemies, but the ability to simply do the right thing for the people of Israel. He's going to give him the wisdom and all the other things he didn't ask for. And so that reminded me of a young man who I had the pleasure of working with as a youth minister. I think he was a self-described adrenaline junkie, but if I'm describing that right, beyond being an adrenaline junkie, that young man had a sense of purpose. And so he found a way that he could match his desire to get the next adrenaline hit with something that could actually benefit the people around him. And not long after graduating, that young man became a storm chaser, and now he is a regular on healthy TV news. A young man who allowed his hunt for adrenaline to lead him into a field that helped him protect not only the livelihood, but the very lives of the people around him. So when I think of situations like that, I think of young men like Solomon, who remind us that at whatever level of ability God has given us, to the degree that we have a larger sense of purpose, we are probably one step closer to actually finding contentment in whatever it is that we do. Solomon seemed to get, and he's going to demonstrate that in the chapters ahead. However, after Solomon hands over the kingdom of Israel to Rehoboam, as we saw back in 1 Kings, it's not going to be very long before Rehoboam only has about 20% of what his dad handed over to him. Quite possibly because his why never seemed to extend very far beyond his me.